Hello and welcome to the UiPath SOAP and Swagger-based REST services demo. This video will show you how to easily utilize these types of web services in your library project. For this demonstration, we'll create a simple project that will use UiPath Orchestrator API to display the status of our robots. Sounds exciting? Let's begin. First, let's create a new library project with a descriptive name. Now we can see two new interface elements, New Service button on the ribbon and a container for our services in the project panel. To create a new service, we could either click on the New Service button on the ribbon or select it from the context menu of the empty container. In the new window, we can create our service. Let's paste the URL of the Orchestrator API in the File or Link field. Then click on Load to get a full list of available API endpoints. It is possible to filter them by name, deselect and select all, as well as to change the name of the namespace. In this case, we don't have to do that, so let's click on Save. Now, we can see that our service was successfully added to the services container. If we look at the Activities panel, we'll see that all API endpoints of Orchestrator are now accessible via simple activities. Let's make use of them. We'll create two simple workflows, one to authenticate our Orchestrator API session and the other to fetch the robot stats. We'll first rename the default workflow to Authenticate. Then we'll create another one called Get Session Stats. For each of the workflows, we'll then import the namespace of our services in the Imports pane. In our case, we'll be adding UiPath Web API. Let's now create the first sequence to authenticate our Orchestrator API session. It'll take our Orchestrator API credentials and return a bearer token. To do so, simply drag and drop the Authenticate activity of our service from the Activities pane. Let's select the newly added activity and view its available properties. To be able to return our bearer token, the Authenticate activity will require some specific input. To be able to provide it, let's create two variables, one for the login model and another for the response. We can do so by pressing Ctrl+K in the Properties pane for each field. It's important to initialize the login model variable as well. This can be done by calling its constructor from the Variables pane. Moving forward, we need to specify all values of our login model variable. To keep our project tidy, let's first add a new sequence, and then 3 assign activities for each required input value. In this case, we'll add the Orchestrator tenant name, username, and finally, a password. As we want to be able to provide those values later on, let's create them by using Ctrl+M, which is a fast way to create input arguments. We'll repeat the process for all 3 values. Lastly, we need to create one more output argument for the bearer token returned by our API call. Let's create it by using Ctrl+Shift+M, which creates an output argument. Then we'll assign to it the bearer token value returned by our Authenticate activity. Let's save the sequence and give our arguments one last check to see if everything is correct. All looks good, so let's prepare our second workflow. Let's switch to our second workflow and drag and drop the Get Session Stats service activity. Similarly to our previous service activity, we need to provide some arguments. In this case, let's create one for the response. We'll use Ctrl+Shift+M to make it an output argument. We'll also use Ctrl+M to create an input argument for our bearer token. This way, we'll be able to authenticate our API call. Let's save our project, and it's done. We can now publish it and use its activities in another project. To publish your library project, simply click on Publish and then select a target location. In our case, it'll be a local folder on our hard drive. You can also specify other options if you wish. To see it in action, we'll have to create a new workflow project and add our library as dependency. This can be done from the Package Manager. Simply find the package in the list, click the Install this package button and confirm your action by clicking Save. Then add the namespace of our service in the Imports pane, in our case, UiPath Web API. After our package was properly installed, we can navigate to the Activities pane to see the 2 activities we've created. Let's build our simple sequence to see these in action. First, drag and drop the Authenticate activity, then the Get Session Stats activity. We'll also add a simple for each loop with a write-line activity to display our results. To complete our workflow, let's provide our Authenticate activity with our orchestrator credentials and an output variable for the bearer token it returns. For the Get Session Stats, we need to provide it with the bearer token and create a new variable to store our session stats. Lastly, we'll loop through the session stats variable using our for each loop. We need to remember to configure our loop to go over elements of type count stats. Let's write down our output in the write-line activity. Save the process and run it to see our results. As we can see in the output pane, the API calls were successful, and we can now see what our robots are up to. That was all for today. Stay tuned for our next tutorials.